Like, if you want me to do it down below, like, do it, or I have to add it up on my own. What does that mean? Ron, I don't understand.
Good evening, church.
Good evening.
Good evening. You're a very polite group. Oh, I appreciate that. Good evening. Top of the day to you. Good to see you. Huh?
It's the bottom of the day.
Well, yeah, it is. What watch is it? Is it the third watch yet?
It's got to be a top of the day somewhere.
It's close, but not there.
Okay, okay. All right. Welcome to the late stages of the second watch.
There we go. We have absolutely decided.
Glad to have you here, whether you're in the building or online. Tonight is our monthly excursion into the apologetics topics led by Mr. Suter. He is looking through extra biblical proofs of biblical things, and he has worked his way all the way up to the wonderfully heart-lifting story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And you just didn't get enough of that last time, so here with more. Mike Suter.
Yes, we only had a slight delay in between, but it was an uplifting.
It was.
month in
You know,
between,
it was
so-
much better.
Yes, yes. Hey,
I mean, you know.
you found it more enjoyable for your soul, is what you're saying.
did.
I knew that's what you meant.
I did.
So, going back to our discussion about Sodom and Gomorrah and the extra biblical proof of that, and last time, because that was back in November, we'll go over just a few little things. We went through the literary references from historical documents and stuff like that that mention Sodom and Gomorrah, and things like the salt pillar that represented Lot's wife. And then we talked a lot about geographically where the location for Sodom is. We talked about the two possible locations, the northern one and the southern one, about how the northern one is based on some interesting events, micro skyburst and stuff like that, but it has very little biblical referencing to that particular site, whereas the southern one fills in quite a few of the checklist for location-specific items. So, today we're going to go more into the archaeological evidence of the southern location for Sodom and Gomorrah, because if you remember the northern location, they decided to completely ignore the idea of Gomorrah, or even the other three cities.
Right,
It's
there's
five
five,
cities
right?
in the plain, yeah. Today we're actually going to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and mention a few of the others as well. But that's where we're getting into today. Did everybody go back and watch last times to make sure we were current with all the information?
Well, look at the time.
I knew it was getting close. Okay. So, hitting Sodom, I had to go back and watch it because I couldn't remember what I looked at.
Well, somebody needed to. I'm glad it was you.
It had like 28 views.
Really?
Yeah. And only one of them is me. Okay, so where is Sodom and Gomorrah located? I don't think I still have my pointer turned on. Let me turn my pointer on. Blue laser pointer. Boom. So we talked, like I said, this was the aforementioned northern site that we kind of ruled out. So this is our things we're going to focus on today. This will be the southern location of Sodom, also known as the Bab Ath-Dara. Probably horribly pronouncing that. I apologize to everybody that knows how to pronounce that. I'm not doing it right, I'm sure. And then this is the location for Gomorrah here, also known as the Tal Numera. Tal being basically a mound that represents the previous location of a city. That's what Tal means in this context.
How many miles between those two guys? Just for...
Those two guys, I don't have it in my current notes, but it's about 10 miles. 16 kilometers, things of such nature. Now, let's discuss the evidence found at the southern sites. The cities of the plain. So, archaeological excavations have located the 5 cities in the valley to the south of the Dead Sea. So this, like we said last time, in the northern part, they hadn't really found what you would call the 5 cities, whereas down here on the southern part, we have a good representation of what they believe to be all 5 of the cities. It matches the biblical account of the kings of the region being listed in Genesis 14:8. And the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in the battle in the valley of Sidon. We talked about how this area down here is the Valley of Sodom, as so labeled. I don't know if you can actually read that from down there, but that's what that says. Boom. That did not do anything. Let's click over here. So, the Bab Adra site shows evidence that it was occupied for a very long period of time. The city wall that is in the region enclosed about 10 acres for the entire city. The wall was actually 23 feet wide and made of mud bricks and stone, so it was a real thick wall. The domicile and pottery evidence also suggests that people settled outside the wall as well, so it wasn't just an internal city. There was farming and caretaking of the local area.
23 feet.
Yeah, 23 feet. That's
Oh,
already
okay.
bigger. So yeah.
Why so thick?
They well,
I mean, the walls
Maybe-
we see are like.
maybe they had a lot of enemies.
Part
They
of
also
building
did stuff.
material.
They also did stuff in the walls.
Yeah.
That we don't understand the context of.
Sometimes there would be dwellings even in the walls.
Like the gates that we talk about, where they would sit in, and people would meet at the gate. There's actually like a meeting room in the wall type stuff. So there's a lot of service nature to the wall itself. I don't know what they did when it was quite a bit of distance from the gate, but I'm sure they stored something over there.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
And
where they put
Way
it.
through
Computer
the
building
bodies.
materials need a wider base, especially to support
Yeah.
larger structure on
Yeah.
top of.
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't find any reference to how tall they believed it was. But the houses discovered there are the typical big or broad room style that are typical of this third Bronze Age period. And they were about 16 feet by 10 feet. That was the entire household. And it was just basically one big enclosed room. And they would put a door in one of the long sides of the house. So that's how they're orientated. And then they were made of mud brick, and they had a center wood beam structure with a thatch roof. Kind of what you envision for that kind of time period. Was pretty much what it is. Now, the city itself probably had a population of about 1,000 people by estimate. When they estimate the number of bodies that were there and the number of households and things like that, they come up with there was around 1,000 people there. I've seen estimates as high as 1,200, as low as about 700. So it's probably reasonably about the 1,000 people range. What's interesting about this particular site, what's very unusual about it, is that there's a cemetery site that is just south of Sodom that has 20,000 tombs in it. And not only that, it's probably used by the entire region, so it's just so big. They have these, what's called a shaft tomb, where it's soft limestone there. So what they do is they basically chisel out a shaft 6 feet deep into the ground, and then once they get down there, they take 3 feet of that and they start cutting these rooms out in there. And the rooms are, about 7 feet around, 3 feet high. Each section could hold 4 to 6 individuals. So if you can envision, these 4 to 6 rooms off the shaft, and there was 20,000 of these rooms effectively. I couldn't get anybody to verify whether or not it was 20,000 shaft tombs or 20,000 rooms off the shafts, because that does make a big difference. And I couldn't find any verification one way or the other. So if we go with a lesser number, they still believe this held upwards of like 500,000 people available in this region. So it's a lot. It is so big, it is not seen anywhere else. This is the only place they found something like this, where it's on this kind of scale, which is evidence that it was probably used by the whole region. All the cities of the plain probably buried their dead here. Now, the neighboring Numeria site, that's that one I showed you down here, okay, where we think is Gomorrah, it had not been around anywhere near as long as Sodom has, okay? And then I gotta go all the way from here, I gotta figure that out. Evidence suggests that the city had only been occupied for about 100 years before it was destroyed. And it shows that they shared the same cemetery site with Sodom based upon evidence of the pottery and the drawings on the pottery and the various garments that they buried the dead in and stuff like that. There are sites in the Sodom cemetery that are have garments and stuff that are only seen in Numeria, or Numera. Sorry, I keep putting extra vowels and consonants in there. It's Numera. So there's things only seen in that site, which further evidence that they are conjoining the process of burying the dead in one spot. What's interesting about this is both of these sites show specifically that they were destroyed twice. Okay? The first destruction coincides with the attack of the 4 kings as they ransacked the cities. Okay? This was destruction on a lesser scale, and the evidence is typical of destruction associated with war. So the conquering party comes in, takes what they want, burns some stuff, things like that. It's not usually a mass obliteration of the city, but they take everything that they find of interest and then burn some other stuff. So that our reference for that is this Genesis 8-12. And the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Sidon against, it's like Cheddar Lamar. He's a cheesy guy. Yeah. The king of Elam, which is very close to the king of Edom. There you go. Okay. So, I don't get to make very many jokes while doing this. I'm sorry. Title king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar. 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Sidon was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. And they also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. The reason why I wanted to include all of that is because that's actually going to talk some into our discussion in a little bit as we move forward. So that's our reference for that first destruction zone. The ash layer at this level, okay, when you dig down through the different layers of sediment there and everything, you can see a defined ash layer there. This one is relatively thin, okay, which is typical of the warlike destruction. Now the Bab Adra site shows extensive damage during this time period to the west wall. Basically, this city existed for a couple of hundred years at least, okay? For the first, say it was 300 years, for the first 270 years, the primary gate for the city was this west gate. Okay? It was a big giant gate through the wall, and there's big evidence that the level of destruction of the west gate is extensive enough that they actually dismantled the wall there, removed the gate, and rebuilt the wall and moved the gate to the northeast wall of the city, because the northeast gate is built on top of that ash layer. Okay, so we can see when that was put up. So, how, when, that's very good sentence.
How when was?
Yeah.
What had happened was.
I tried to include all the words, so if you didn't
Is that how you do shorthand?
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly. I just keep them all there.
In case you missed them other places.
So
Yeah.
what the, who, what, when, where?
So when was the 4 kings' attack on the cities? We can take advantage of a few marker points when we do this, and it's actually, I brought my copy of the Adams chronological timeline here that you guys could peruse through, and I'll try to bring it next time too, because you guys might like to take a look at this. We talked a little bit about Usher and his chronology last time. This is a visualization of the Usher chronology with a bunch of other modern chronologies added to it. So it includes the Egyptian chronologies, goes all the way up to the 1900s, so it has quite a bit of a run. But this is a handy little tool when we're doing this, because it gives you a very good visual tool to see when people were alive and when people died and stuff. It's very handy for that. It also does trace the full blood lineage of Christ in one. So it's kind of neat to do that as well. But we can take advantage of some of the biblical markers that we get in the scripture to define some of these things. So in 1 Genesis 12:4, It says, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. All right, so we know that Abraham was 75 when he left Haran. Okay, now using the Usher timeline, Abraham was born in about 1996 BC. Okay, thus Abraham left Haran in about 1921 BC. There you go. Okay, that's our first mark point. Now, Lot and Abraham part in chapter 13:11. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. I include this because it's necessary for them to be departed, so that Lot is in Sodom at the time that it's destroyed and stuff like that. It's also necessary for him to be departed, so that Lot is taken by the 4 kings and needs Abraham to come save him. Right? Okay. So that gives us, not that we have a direct year associated with that, but it gives us an anchor point to kink off to. So the 4 kings attack occurs in Genesis chapter 14. We already read all that basically. And Ishmael is born in Genesis chapter 16. Now what's important here is then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. Now, Genesis 16:16 says Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. It's always nice when you're reading to actually finish the entire chapter that you're reading before you start chasing rabbits and tails. The very first time I read this chapter, I started chasing 16:3, and the Lord gave me the answer at the end of the chapter. I just didn't wait long enough to answer it. So I tell you this as a bit of a message to read the whole thing before you start chasing on.
Works with some of the parables too, I've learned.
Yeah.
Sometimes after you hear the parable, you're like, man, what in the world does that mean? I got to do the study.
Yeah, you're like,
sometimes he explains it right after.
Yeah,
that.
then Jesus
There you go.
what I meant was.
Yes, very true. So, Ishmael was born around 1910 BC. The 4 kings attack probably occurred not too much prior to Ishmael being born, so we estimate that to be around, say, 1914 BC or so. Okay, now it is kind of a stab in the dark there, but if you look at the sum total of events and Abraham's life and Lot's life and stuff like that, it's probably not too terribly far away from Ishmael's birth. So, when did God destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Isaac is born in Genesis chapter 21:5. Now, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Okay, thus Isaac was born around 1896 BC. The visit of the 3 men, Jesus and the 2 angels, right, occurs prior to that about 9 months. Now, I have seen some arguments over this because the way the Hebrew is, the Lord doesn't say specifically, you are pregnant now and I will be back when he is born. But give or take a little bit, it's in this zone, okay? In Genesis 18:10, and he said, being the Lord, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Thus Isaac was conceived around the time of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? Now, we're going to call that about 1897 BC for reference. So the time between the destruction caused by the attacks of the 4 kings and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, if we do the math, is around 17 years. All right. Now, we did a lot of math there to figure out what that is. We're actually not going to apply that for just a little bit because there is something else we need to go over first. So hold on to that 17 years run. Okay. Now, the final destruction layer of the Sodom site is up to 3 feet thick in places. Okay. So the ash level is massive.
I mean, yeah, in archaeological terms, that's an unbelievable amount of debris.
Yeah,
Like,
it's huge. Like when you're digging down, you think you're never going to come to the end of this. That's virtually coming up there like Pompeii's
like, yeah,
level of
catastrophic
ash.
fires and ash.
It's pretty epic. Now, the interesting thing about the Sodom site is because of how it's located and the hill structure. Remember we said the Dead Sea is basically surrounded by a mountain on the east side and a mountain on the right side, effectively. Okay, it's nestled in between these two mountains with a valley to the north and a valley to the south. And so this Sodom, if you'll notice in this map over here, is pretty darn close to the edge here of the mountain, and it actually, there's a lot of erosion in this zone. So this site is actually eroded quite a bit, which does cause a little bit of a problematic issue when you go to examine things of such nature. But some details are hard to work out, and several areas remain quite in good shape to exemplify the severity of the disaster. The northeast gate, for instance, is completely destroyed by fire, with evidence of charcoal and broken bits massed together with a great deal of ash in that region where the northeast gate was. You can tell where the entire gate was basically burned to a crisp. And then a massive number of mud bricks are actually piled up in the western half of the site, suggesting not only a heavy destruction level, but once the structures fell apart, they slid and tumbled down the slope and created a large number of debris fields. So there's sections of the city where there's not much debris because the debris has actually been pushed down to the lower parts of the city in that. Now, the Gomorrah site, Gomorrah, is better preserved and has less material to sort through and consider, since it has a relatively short timeline, that 100 years we talked about. That makes it a lot easier because when you dig down, there's not 400 years worth of material to eventually uncover. Okay. Now, so this makes it easier to define certain events. There is also no erosional damage to the site as well, meaning that the evidence is much better preserved than the Sodom. And by analyzing the type of pottery found in the ash layer of both sites, remember how we defined last time and in Babel, and we talked about that stuff. Pottery is real important when you're looking at this stuff because that's kind of like their version of the iPhone 6. Okay, you show up to a town. And the best version of the iPhone you can find is an iPhone 4. They assumed because the town was destroyed before the iPhone 5 came out, because obviously everybody would buy that iPhone 5 when it came out. This is how the pottery works. Okay, so as the pottery technology develops, people get better and better pottery, and so they look for the best pottery they can find in the zone, and that helps them link up time periods and stuff like that. Now, the site shows that a large amount of broken mud brick debris and carbonized wooden beams in the upper levels of the ash layers of the houses and building structures. It indicates that the structures burned from the thatch roof down, okay, with the final mud brick outer wall structure actually collapsing as the support beams burn from the middle. What's interesting about this is when they dig up the sites, there's an ash layer that represents where the roof was, and it came down and it burned. And then the beams actually land on top of that ash layer, and then the bricks land on top of that. It kind of falls in on itself. And so that is also indicative of what we know about the structures of this time and everything. This is exactly what we would expect to see if the roof burned first. Okay? Now, skeletons and a large amount of bone debris was found in the ash debris layers. So there is quite a bit of death in this zone. Okay, and a lot of the bones are broken apart. We don't know exactly why. There's not a lot of evidence in that. They did say it wasn't like a lot of the bones were burned on the individual edges and stuff, so it's not like they were broken beforehand. But you know, 1,000 years is hard on this earth against stuff. So we don't know exactly what caused the breakage, but there is quite a bit of things that happen that can lead to that. Now, a thick layer of burnt debris is found in almost every area of the site. Oops, there we go. And this is an interesting thing that one of the excavators had to say, that under the topsoil, which is what they call the desert pavement of the desert, that's a top layer that sort of seals itself in, and the naturally deposited wind-blown sandy soil, the entire area was covered by the ashy debris of the final destruction of the town. And this is in the Gomorrah site. And we would expect that ash layer to be smaller than the Sodom site, right? Why is that?
Less time.
less time. Less history, is a smaller town. All right? If you have 4,000 residences, for say, you're going to have a lot more ash than if you have 400 residences. All right? Now, the ashy debris of the final destruction of the town, up to half a meter, so basically like 1.5 feet in depth. The ash contained fragments of wooden beams that had supported the roofs of the dwellings and lay immediately over the latest occupational layer within each room, sealing the material beneath it. Not infrequently, there was mud brick detritus over the ash, which had resulted from the collapse of the mud brick superstructures after the final conflagration, which is a word we don't get to use too terribly often. Conflagration is a wonderful word. Not wonderful if it's happening around you, but it's a fun
all about
word.
perspective.
All fun words. Yes. So what about that math we talked about? Remember that I mentioned that there are 2 layers of ash at these sites. The lowest one being thinner and indicative of the war-related damage, and the upper one being very thick and marking the final destruction of the cities. Both these cities were basically not reoccupied after the final destruction of this. Okay. Now, against the outer wall of the Gomorrah site, we see that these 2 ash layers are separated by alternating deposited layers of chaff and carbonized materials, probably from cooking fires. Okay, it's an activity zone on this side of the wall. They were probably preparing something that was on a seasonal construct. So they show evidence of seasonal deposition, indicating that the 2 ash-generating events are between 15 and 20 years apart, which correlates very well with our biblical timeline of around 17 years between the attack of the 4 kings and the Lord's destruction of the cities. Sweet. Okay, so we see how that archaeology lines up with what the Bible already told us. Right?
Yep.
Fun. Okay. Moving on. Now, we also discussed the actual destruction by fire and brimstone. Okay, we started that last time. I talked to you about the Eurasia Plate and that abduction zone there, the Dead Sea Fault that runs basically right where the Dead Sea is in between those mountain zones. Okay, it's where the Arabia Plate basically meets the African Plate, and it's pushed against by the Eurasia Plate there. In Genesis 19:24 through 25, and the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. Now, brimstone can also be interpreted as being or including sulfur. Now, when we think of brimstone, what do you think of when you think of brimstone, Ron? Not sulfur, because I just said sulfur.
That was the only thing that came to mind was the sulfur.
Brimstone and hellfire, right? So
Like
brimstone.
volcanic.
It's kind of classically like that volcanic rock, nasty, harsh stuff, right? What I wanted to get across the point here, there used to be some belief that because of the nature of the word here that they interpreted as brimstone, that a volcano erupted in this zone. Okay? Not terribly impossible because it is a fault line. You could have some volcanic activity there. But there have been some very good archaeologists that have gone to the region and some volcanologists that have looked at it, and they can't find any evidence of any volcanic activity within like 1,000 years of any of this. Okay, so we're pretty sure it wasn't a volcano. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because that word is not technically well translated as what we think as volcanic rock. It's much more linked to the idea of sulfur and bitumen and stuff like that, with the tarry stuff we talked about.
Which we already know they were big natural.
We already know, yes, exactly. So the bitumen is that black, sticky form of petroleum that bubbles up from the earth to produce pools in the surface, and is sticky and nasty and flammable. Okay, and the Lord tells us that that southern area of the Dead Sea is very commonly associated with pools of bitumen and stuff like that. Now, the location of Babda and Numeria are actually directly on that major fault line, which, if you look closely at this drawing, is pretty much, or this painting, this is what appears to be the earth opening up and the city falling inside of it, which is interesting, and a giant conflagration. I like the application of this lightning bolt down here. Getting ready to strike if you look really close. I think this is Lot's wife. Okay. I think that's what that's supposed to be. And I think it's supposed to be Lot and his 2 remaining daughters there. I wanted to show you this because this is actually the nature of the fault line. So you see, because of the type of fault it is, there's this fault here at the bottom of the mountain on the east side, and this fault here in the bottom of the mountain on the west side. There's actually this massive pillar of salt that runs down through the crust right here. And then that's the Dead Sea there, and a bunch of other jazz. But basically, Sodom is located on this side of that fault. Okay? And what's interesting about that is there's this notion that what the Lord may have done, okay, is opened up the fault and through a rather gigantic earthquake. So there's quite a bit of evidence that there was a pretty good sized earthquake during this time period. Earthquakes are very common in this region just due to this fault line anyways. And that what he did was he forced the bitumen and the sulfur and also the salt into the atmosphere due to the action of this earthquake, and then he ignited the bitumen, okay, which would be a horrific thing to have happen. And we've never seen it happen naturally, and we know that this wasn't a natural event by any means. And I don't usually try to explain the Lord's miracles in any way. This is just an interesting concurrence of things in this region. But if he lit it with lightning and then basically allowed it to fall on the city, it would basically be a massive fire cloud of horrible nastiness that descended upon the entire region. All of a sudden, it would be quite horrific and not implausible for the nature of how it happened.
It mixed with the salt and would render the whole area uninhabitable for
So
generations.
when we analyze the soils and stuff, the salt that is specific to, like this column and stuff, and specific to the content of the Dead Sea, gets spread across this entire valley, down into the ash and stuff. So it seems to be coordinated with the event, as well as the sulfur, because the sulfur doesn't normally just become part of the atmosphere all of a sudden, so that it would be mixed with the ash and stuff. But in this particular instance, there's a bunch of sulfur mixed in with this ash as well, which means it's really stinky ash. Okay? At least that's the way I think about it. When you did down
Pretty sure it would be.
stinky ash, yeah.
But it would taste salty.
You guys didn't like my third joke, I'm sorry.
Because there's other types of like volcanic events. Just because a volcano didn't erupt, there could have been like a fault can separate and allow like a rupture and a boiling off of
Certainly
this
can.
bitumen into the atmosphere. Like there's different vents and ways that could have.
There's all kinds of stuff,
Certainly
yeah.
possible.
Now, when it talks about when Abraham gets up that next morning, right, and he looks in the direction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he sees the places burning, right? Now, the word that it uses there that we just interpret as smoke, basically, actually is more indicative of a very, very thick, black, humongous column of smoke, okay? Kind of, has anybody ever seen tires burning? Yeah. Kind of like tires burning, which is bitumen. It creates a very significant effect, very similar to tires burning. So it is reasonable at that state to say that yes, it would be definitely a massive cloud event like that, which would lead to all the ash that we see piled up in that archaeological layer. So, another little piece of evidence here that the existence of Sodom as some extra biblical proof of its nature comes from those found in the Ebla tablets. You ever heard of the Ebla tablets? We haven't actually talked about these yet because they haven't really dealt too much with the things we're talking about. But there's a huge number of clay tablets that are discovered in Syria, Aleppo, at the Tel Mardik, which, since it says Tel, means that it's basically a large hill, right? That would represent where the city was. So, it's in the late 1970s by the Italian archaeologist Piero Maffei. I'm not Italian or anything, that's probably wrong too, I'm sorry. Now, the site is the location of the ancient city of Ebla, and around 1,800 complete tablets and 4,700 fragments and a bunch of these smaller pieces are identified in this site. There's basically, the king had a palace, and he was running a library in the palace, and after there's a big conflagration that destroys the city, they come back and actually find all these tablets as they're what's called in situ. So they're as they were stored on like wooden shelves, the shelves get burned and they fall down. That's how they found them, sitting on top of burned wooden shelves. So they're amazingly well stored in this form. Now, the tablets contain cuneiform text, which we discussed back in that Babel section. And one of the tablets actually traces a route from Syria along the western shore of the Dead Sea, south of the Dead Sea Plain, and then north along the east side of the plain and the Dead Sea. And this is the route that it traces. And it starts up here and comes down to 208, 207, oh sorry, it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay? Now, 2 cities of the plain are listed in this from the Genesis 14:8, and that's the Admah and the Sodom. Okay? Now, the Sodom is this one right here, which is 11, which is right where we thought it should be. All right? So I think this is kind of the final nail in the notion that this is the southern site. This is the actual site of Sodom. And then the Admah, which is another one of the cities of the plain listed, is actually 210 down here. And those are the only 2 of the 5 listed. But remember, too, we don't know exactly when this path was made, and we know that, for instance, Gomorrah had only been around a fairly short period of time. So it's quite possible this was done before Gomorrah was even on the map. So things like that. Now, it's also evidence in the material recovered from the southern Baba Dra site, such as the cuneiform cylinders, the pottery, and the sculptures that reveal a significant Syrian influence on their pottery culture and things like that. So there's pretty good evidence that the Syrians were there just by the material we find at the site in Sodom. Now, I think that's all I got. Yep, that's all I got. I think that kind of falls to the conclusion of our Sodom and Gomorrah region.
I love the timeline part of it.
Oh, the bouncing through the years?
Yeah, the between the 2 devastations.
Yes. Yeah, and I really like how that falls together exactly how we know it should. And it's one of those things where we've seen several of the times before where the Bible proves out even something that we thought was not true that turns out absolutely to be true. And that's especially from completely disassociated referencing.
Yep.
That's always nice.
Yep.
Any questions about any Sodom and Gomorrah material?
Have they found any other cities? I know you just had kind of been focused on those 2.
I haven't found much referencing on the other 3 cities of the plain. I think it's one of those things where there's only so much time in the day. And Sodom and Gomorrah are kind of like the go-to place. That's what everybody wants to do, to get their name on that paper so that they can get some more research funding. I keep looking to see if there's much other activity going around in there, but they've only really been in that region heavily for about 30 years.
Is that area very inhabited at this point? Like, are there modern cities in that?
It's still kind of a nasty place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
asphalt doesn't sound fun.
No, yeah, it's still got all the sulfur and the asphalt.
Yeah.
I mean, the Dead Sea is not a very pleasant place
Sure.
anyways, in our time. I mean, when you're on the one side, it is very much kind of plush and beautiful because there's a rain shadow that's caused by the mountain there, which means the one side's really nice. The other side is a horrid wasteland.
Yeah. Just salt and
yeah.
nasty.
So everybody always wants to be on this side and not on that side.
It's kind of like Shelby.
And most of the
It's too easy.
Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah are on that right-hand side, the better side.
East side.
Yeah, the east side, and then the other cities are actually located on the west side. So I don't know what hope keeps them from doing that, but I haven't found a lot of referencing for that.
Was there a specific reason that the book here was interesting for tonight, or was this just a general regular?
The book's nice. So I use that as a tool when I'm doing that math. That's what I like about this particular chronology, is it has like the birth and death times plotted, dates plotted out, the years are listed. Like at the end of the timeline, it gives the year which it ended, which is always nice when you're doing the math to make sure that you got the same solution as that guy. It's kind of like referencing Bob as you're going to make sure you got the right answer. So that's why this is handy in a lot of ways. Other than what it does too is it gives you the reality of lifespan, because we don't really think about how long Noah lived, and when he actually did die and what all happened before he passed away. And when you look through here, you get to see, well, Noah's line stops here, and man, there was all kinds of things that happened before he died. He got to see all that stuff. And then you see kind of the explosion of the tribes over here in Jazz, and everything kind of expands out pretty quick. It's also nice too because it ties a few other historical timelines to it. So it gives you kind of a world context of what's going on. And it goes all the way back to the front pages, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel down here, back in 4004.
Okay.
So that's because that's the Usher chronology, and he's where we get that 4004.
Sure. Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments?
I know it's been a long time since you did your Wall of Jericho thing, but how thick was it? I know there was like a series of walls.
Are you asking me how thick the Wall of Jericho was?
Yeah.
I don't
Because you mentioned the other one, I just.
It was really thick too because Rahab's apartment was in the wall.
Yeah, they walked across it and stuff. It was a much heavier wall than this wall. It was also a much taller wall, most likely.
And there were two. There were two.
Yeah, there was like a series.
It was a better built wall too.
But because all of these were like city-states, almost all of the cities in this area for thousands of years had some kind of wall structure.
Yeah, because that was your
Once
only
it
way
got to a certain size, that was your only way to.
Defend yourself.
Yeah.
Because you never knew which king was going to associate with which other king, and then they were just going to come and knock off all your people and take all your stuff on them. So it was quite a concern. Or, heaven forbid, these four kings come down out of the north and start slaughtering everybody, and then take away everything you have. It's that kind of thing. So they always try to unify together to make sure they don't have that anymore. I had turned it off. I'm sorry. I don't know how I turned it off. But, anyways, that's all I got. The next time we will talk about something else. I'm sure. I think this gets us past. Well, it depends on whether or not we go back and talk about Abraham stuff and his life in a little bit of detail there. We'll see how the Lord leads there. But I think we're going to make it past chapter 19 at this point. So we're cruising right along. We've only, if the Lord tarries, we've got 40, 50 more years of this.
Never have we been more inclined to pray with return.
If we knew Abraham, what would be the other direction? discussion if we didn't.
I don't,
agree.
I don't,
Not
I haven't read it yet, yeah, so, not in that construct.
I got you.
I usually don't read too far ahead in this construct, so we'll pace it out when we get there. Other than that, I know you're ready to start your prayer meeting.
I am. So if you are watching online, you have the link to the Zoom prayer meeting. Please join us for that. It will start immediately. If not, we will see you Sunday. And right after Mike prays, we'll say, love God, love everybody else. I jumped the gun there. So, why don't you pray us out?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessing of the opportunity to just study your word this evening, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to see some of this physical evidence of your glory, Lord, and all those things that tie together, and the proofs of your word and the truth within it that we don't need to verify that it's real, because we already know that. But in seeing that those numbers line up, that is just, it magnifies your glory.
That's right.
And it always brings me joy when those when I get to see your fingerprint on that you didn't have to tell us all those details, but you told us so that we could sit down and we could do the math and we could go, oh man, that's cool. And Lord, that is an amazing thing, and I really genuinely appreciate that and all that you do for us out of love. Lord, I just pray that as we move forward, guide us as to what we're to study next. May we not be able to relate to anything in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I pray, Lord, that we never find ourselves like Lot, living in an area of such great sin. Well, maybe we already are. Lord, you define all that. We'll just live where you tell us to live. Guide us and protect us, and may we not be wiped out with the bitumen on fire like everybody else is to be. Continually guide us and protect us. Amen.
Amen. Like I said, if you're watching online, the link to the Zoom prayer meeting, please join us. That begins immediately. If not, we will see you Sunday, but until then,
Love God.
Love everybody else.